Okay, can you hear me?
Hi, Steve. Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Okay, well, let me get started. Well, again, my name's Steve Plogstead. I've been living in, well, I don't have the slides are a little screwed up. I'm not in Cleveland, I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, don't worry about it. But yes, I've been involved in trying to find information on gluten and medication since about 1995 when the dietitian I worked with asked me if I could speak to her local society meeting. And we had about 50 people. And so I thought I could find that really very easily. And big surprise. I think again, this was 1995, and the most recent literature was from 1984. And so it sort of put me on a track to find some more information on this and get a little educated. This first conference I gave, I said, well, just give me a call. I said, give me a call. I'll just answer your questions that way. I got flooded. So I started keeping track of all my calls and that and started logging it. And then I developed a website that I maintain when I find information, either by calling a drug company or even customers or patients get on, then they'll email me and tell me we talked to so-and-so and we have, there's no gluten in their medication. So um, it's been very helpful. So if you've got anything to send my way someday, please feel free to contact me and give me your information and I'll put it on my website. But the question really revolves, do we really have to worry about gluten in medications? And the slide you see up there, medications are made of active ingredient and then fillers. And these fillers are known in our industry as excipients. And these excipients, there's multiple excipients, and they play a vital role in the integrity of the tablet or capsule. And there's actually excipients in liquids, injectables, topicals, and sometimes they're used for keep them from disintegrating over time, or keep them fresh, or keep them at a certain body or fluid acid-base balance to protect the integrity of the medications. But those medications can contain a starch. What I've found are the most common sources of starch are corn, potato, and yes, even a little tapioca. And I hate to say it, yes, you can find some wheat starch in some of the medications. Although the amount of starch is very, very little, it's my job to make sure you don't get contaminated. So this slide that showed right here these are some of the common, you might not know what they are. In fact, I hate to say it, most of the pharmacists you'll call probably don't know what these are either. So I hate to bash my own group, but we weren't taught this in school. But as you can see, there's lactose. For those some people are concerned about lactose, pregelatinized starch, corn starch. I'll talk about those other starches in just a minute. But you can see these are some of the most common products that are found as excipients. And at times you might find 6, 7, or 8 of those in any one particular inside the tablet or capsule and actually on the outside. So the next slide here. So, those who have followed the food industry, the word starch by the FDA for a food product means it comes from corn, unless they've changed that. In the pharmaceutical industry, the plain word starch could mean corn, potato, wheat. Something to let you know is that I have not found a medication yet that contains barley or rye. I don't even think I've come across a rice. So I know that there are several starches that the celiacs must avoid. But as far as prescription medications, you only have to worry about the wheat. Okay, so a lot of times I refer to wheat starch when I respond to a customer question, and they said, what about barley and rye? And I said, well, that's not a problem. There's no oats in it. Forget the controversy with oats and celiac disease. There are no oats in it. It's just going to be mostly corn, potato, and a little bit of wheat. Okay. So anyways, so if you do find
I don't know why the slides are being weird.
Well, you can leave it on pre-gelatinized for a second. So if the plain word starch, again, you have to investigate what kind of starch. Also, you'll see on a prescription medication the word pre-gelatinized starch, and here I've outlined what pre-gelatinized is. It's just basically pre-processing of the starch. There's no gelatin in it. It's just pre-processing it to give it certain characteristics. Go ahead to the next slide. The other one that's very, very common is sodium starch glycolate. And because it is a starch derivative, it can come from any starch source that I mentioned before. However, for the 20 years that I've been doing this, I have never, ever found a sodium starch glycolate that came from wheat. Now, can that be guaranteed for the rest of our natural lives? No, I can't guarantee that. But when I get to a slide later, I'll show you where we can get some of this information that you can even obtain, or your pharmacist can. But anyways, I would say 90 to 95% of the sodium starch glycolate, or SSG I call it, is going to come from corn, from potato. I found a few instances where the sodium starch glycolate came from corn. And like I said before, I have never, ever, ever seen sodium starch glycolate from wheat. And I have never seen pre-gelatinized starch come from wheat. In fact, I've only seen wheat starch listed as wheat starch. And we'll talk about those manufacturers a little bit later. They're wonderful people. Okay. So I did there was a labeling search done a few years ago, and the investigator put in the word starch for prescriptions. And he found, they looked at 4,000 package inserts, which are the little pieces of information that comes on all prescription stock bottles. Out of that, 1/3 had one of the words starch, had some part of the word starch in it. And out of that, as you can see, 399 were pre-gelatinized. One actually said, the 53 said pre-gelatinized corn. Some said maize. And as you can see, the rest of them, how they were listed. And it was interesting, when I first reviewed this slide, I had never found a product that had wheat starch. Well, I have been able to find that since then. I'll go to the next slide. Now, there is a controversy over maltodextrin, and I don't want to get into that. Let me tell you, I don't have celiac disease. I tell people when I give up to give talks in front of a big audience, I have conference celiac disease. So when I get up in front of a crowd, my stomach starts turning and churning, and I know what it feels like to have celiac symptoms, but I don't have this myself. I do this as a public service because I really enjoy the people I work with. But maltodextrin is also one of the products that you can find in a prescription medication. And I have found some maltodextrins that have been derived from wheat. And I went to my good friend Trish Thompson and saw what her description and her feeling of maltodextrin brand wheat brand maltodextrin, and this is what she came up with. And again, you have to be your own judge. And so now on my website, when I'm updating it to a new format, and I'm actually marking anytime maltodextrin is found in one of my products. And then if I can identify the source of maltodextrin, then I'll put that also in there. So it makes it easier for the consumer who's looking at the website to determine for themselves whether they want to proceed taking the medication or maybe go find an alternative. We'll go to the next slide. So Clan Thompson, she had a great website, and she also talked about another issue that we run into, and it's mannitol. Now, mannitol is what they call a sugar alcohol or a polyol, and I have some slides on that. And some of the drug companies are actually telling their consumers that because it has mannitol in it, it's contaminated with wheat, and which is not the case. And Clan did some good research and came out. And we'll discuss those in a few minutes, but you may hear a lot of stuff about mannitol from the drug manufacturers, and they are gluten-free. They are pure. They're basically pure sugar, so we don't have to worry about that. And I'll get into the polyols on the next slide. So again, mannitol is a group of sugars. They're called either sugar alcohols or polyols. And you have seen these in a lot of medications. This is what goes into the sugar-free candies and sugar-free cough syrups. They can cause diarrhea because they do, give an osmotic load to the bowel. But these are, they're called sugar alcohols, but they're really neither sugars or alcohols. They kind of resemble it, but that was the fancy term they came with. But they do provide some carbohydrates. So, we still have to take care and make sure we understand the role in either medications or, like I said, if you're diabetic, what this could mean to you. So next slide. So the most common polyols that you'll see is sorbitol, and that's in a lot of your liquid medications. Sorbitol is a big player as a sweetener in sugar and liquid medications. Mannitol, you can find that in oral tablets, capsules, liquids, it doesn't matter. Xylitol, maltitol syrup, lactitol, erythritol, isomalt, etc. As you see in front of you, all of these are sugar alcohols, and some of these may be found in your medications, your liquid medications, especially, like I said, mannitol, sorbitol, and I've seen the xylitol. They're the most common. They can come from, like I said, any one of these starches, but they are so far processed that the end product doesn't look like anything like the beginning product. So you don't have to really worry about having. You have to have the protein in the solution, the gluten protein, and by the time it gets to the sugar alcohol, there are no proteins left. I know there is some debate out there whether or not this is an issue or not, but I'm just giving you some background. Like I said, if you having some difficulties and you think it may be to the mannitol, and you are a little bit more sensitive to these products, and again, you may have to move to a different product, but they are considered gluten-free. Are there other sources of potential gluten contamination? Well, here's one that's been running around the internet for quite a while. It's been this a drug called olmesartan, which is a blood pressure med. Brand name was Benicar, and Mayo Clinic had a list, or had a series of 22 patients they reported on that patients had celiac symptoms, and they had the villus atrophy and various degrees of inflammation, but their antibodies were normal. In fact, if you watch TV enough, you'll see there's some lawyers out there trying to get you to jump into a lawsuit so you can sue the manufacturers because of your symptoms. Now, I'm not promoting that, please don't. I don't mean it that way, but I guess it's. I haven't seen the numbers recently, so it must have exploded when the Mayo's report hit the internet. But the drug itself, the Benicar itself, and all the generics that use that, I haven't found any of them that have gluten in it. But these people, not everybody, but they're reporting that they have these gluten-like enteropathies from taking that medication. So, just because it doesn't have gluten in it doesn't mean you can't get that awful feeling. Let's see what the next slide has to say. But if you, I put that on there, what the drug actually contains. Oh, no, go back to, it has the ingredients down below, the hydroxypropylcellulose, et cetera, et cetera. If you look in that right there, there is not one starch. There's not even one starch derivative in there. And still these people are responding as though they were just contaminated with gluten. So, we always need to go look deep into our medications if we're having a reaction. So let's see the next slide. So that's a big one. I just, what if I go to an operation and while I'm under anesthesia, they decide to stick me with a whole bunch of drugs, including your immunizations. And so you don't have to worry about it. Remember, you're supposed to be contaminated through the gut, not through the injectable route. So you don't get the same cascade, but even disregarding that part, the excipients in the injectable drugs are extremely minimal, and they're usually there just to balance the acid-base characteristics of the drug, so the drug doesn't expire in a very short time. And manufacturer, they want a couple years, that they could put this on the shelf. So I have never found a injectable drug that had many ingredients in it, and none of them had gluten in it. Although you will find mannitol every once in a while, because it is a sugar and it's a stabilizer. There's a small amount of mannitol in certain drugs, but you're not going to get a response like if you'd ingested some gluten. Let's go on to the. So how do you protect yourself? How do you get information? You can talk to the drug manufacturers, and anybody's ever called a drug manufacturing, they treat you like you are something less than human at times. I hate to say that, but they put you on hold. They get back to you in 2 or 3 days, and they give you pretty much not very good information. You have a package insert. You don't have it. Your pharmacist has it. You can ask the pharmacist for the package insert. You can go online and see if you can get to the company's website and see if you can download their package insert. And somewhere about in the top third of the insert, you'll see the excipient ingredients in there. Or you can go on the drug company website. Sometimes they're nice enough to say, whether or not they have gluten or no gluten. You can go to internet websites and they are what they are. You know, the internet is a wonderful tool, but sometimes it's not really good, and except my website. And then you've got chat rooms, you've got blogs, and, you know, somebody will give you their experience, or they'll give you their result of their conversation with somebody. You can ask your local pharmacist, but, you know, I love to have an audience to have everybody raise their hand and see how much luck they've had with their pharmacist. And, you know, I don't even know if the pharmacists know how to spell gluten. And so God love their souls, but sometimes they don't know what, you know, you're asking, and it makes it very difficult. So I'm trying to educate them. I force all doctor of pharmacy students at one of the colleges I teach at, they've got to sit through a lecture of mine, and they can't get out. That's 165 people a year at least who've got out of college that know something about celiac disease. So, and I know there's a couple other colleges of pharmacy that are teaching them. In fact, one dean of a college of pharmacy in New York, he's got celiac disease, and he forces them to sit through 2 hours, and he says, I'm the dean, I can do what I want. So he's teaching them. So we're trying to get the information out to my pharmacy colleagues. Next slide. Now here's some internet resources that you can access for free. Now, I'm not trying to advertise that number one there, that gluten-free drugs. That's the one I maintain. And just for your information, there's no advertising. There's no fee for this. I pay for this out of my own pocket. I refuse to take any money from anybody for any reason. There are links to food sellers and manufacturers, et cetera, but that's just as just for your benefit. Like I said, I get nothing from it, and half the people don't even know they're listed on my site, and then a couple other sites. What I want to direct you to are those last two sites. Those of you who have never gone to these sites, it is an amazing amount of information. DailyMed was the first of the two, and Pillbox is actually a derivative of DailyMed, and they present their information in a different way. But you can type in your medication, you can go find the company that your pharmacist has dispensed to you, or you can ask your pharmacist, you know, what brand do you have in your store, and you can look this up ahead of time, or your pharmacist can look this up. Most of these, since they're a government website, most of the major chains don't block internet access in their stores to government websites, so your pharmacist can access this. And then the last one is Pillbox, and like I said, it's from the same company. Oh no, go ahead. That's next. Go ahead to the next slide. It's Pillbox, and it displays information in a little different way. And actually, I found this one to be extremely useful. Even though there's not the same number of records, I use this as one of my scanning or screening tools. And so I did a search, and I typed the word starch, and I came up with 8,700 records. Then I typed in the word corn and got 6,500 records. As you see, sodium, starch, glycolate, potato, maltodextrin, lactose, and soy. And just for fun, I said, I'm going to type in the word wheat, and I got 11 records. And like I said, to that point, I have never found wheat in any of my medications. So I was like, this is a great little site, you know. Go to the next slide. So here's what a screenshot looks like. So it'll come up, and you basically want to ignore the left-hand side. That's just for pill identification. You go to the right-hand side and you type the word, and I'm just going to say lisinopril, which is a blood pressure med. Then you can actually type in the next box, find me a lisinopril, and then you can type in the word corn and say that has corn in it. Or you can type in, there's a little box that says, find me a product that doesn't contain corn. So if you have a corn sensitivity, you have a lactose sensitivity, you have a soy sensitivity, you can type in lisinopril, and you can type in, you know, wheat, and you can, you know, it'll come up with 0 records, and you type in lisinopril and say, find it without a particular ingredient. And then it'll give you a list of choices. Go to the next slide. So I did the search for wheat, and so these drugs came up. Okay, so these all have wheat in. Of course, that's how it shows to you. And so then you would click the show more information. So I think it's on the next slide. And as you can see, then it will display the inactive ingredients or the excipients. And you can peruse those, and then lo and behold, starch, wheat. And so it will identify at a greater extent where some of these starches come from. And that's what DailyMed does in a very nice manner. Theirs it's in a tabular form, and whereas Pillbox is in a form such as this. So I don't think I did a screenshot. No, I didn't do a screenshot of the DailyMed, but it's if it shows, like, for example, I told you sodium starch glycolate, and a drug company might tell you, well, gee, we use sodium starch glycolate, but I don't know where it came from. And I find that very interesting, because if you scroll down on the DailyMed, it'll tell you sodium starch glycolate type A potato. So it will actually tell you the type of sodium starch glycolate, where it comes from. So it's amazing that the drug information people you call can't answer that, but you can go to a government website where the drug companies are actually sending this to the government. So the drug information person doesn't know this, but the company's displaying it on the government website. So I find that kind of humorous at times. That's why it's so frustrating to talk to a drug company. Let's go to the next slide. And just to let you know that this is a picture of a counting tray that your pharmacist will dump your medications on, count them out, and put them into a bottle. Well, that was that sometimes can accumulate over a day, and the pharmacists don't wipe that down on a regular basis, because they're processing so many prescriptions. So if you have a problem, you might want to ask your pharmacist to, before you count out my medication, would you mind taking some alcohol and cleaning off the tray? It's equivalent to breadcrumbs in a toaster. We don't want to take a chance. There's not much there, and the chances of weak contamination is minimal, but you have to worry. You have to be concerned. So let's go to the next slide. Oops. So basically, what the last couple of minutes I have before questions is what I tell people to do when you're calling a drug company. Say, you'll ask them, do you have any gluten in your medication? And they'll say, and the response you get was, well, we don't have any gluten in the medication. We don't purposely put gluten in our medication. However, we can't guarantee that some accidental contamination hasn't occurred. Okay. You might, but if they do tell you it does contain gluten, you say, well, okay, would you mind telling me which one of the ingredients contains gluten? And 9 times out of 10, they'll give you a polyol. So then the polyol, and you say, well, okay, I know the polyols are clean. If that's the only source of gluten, thank you very much, but you're wrong. And you can go on. If they tell you some other product, then you can do some more searching. But generally, they're going to tell you that if they're going to tell you definitively it has gluten in it, it's going to be because it's got a polyol, and they're afraid. I even had a drug company once tell me that their drug contained gluten, and I looked at it and I said, well, how could you? There's nothing in there it had glucose in it. Have you guys ever heard of gummy vitamins? Well, gummy vitamins are made of dextrose. And the lady said, yeah, we use corn. We use corn to make our dextrose, and corn's got gluten in it. I said, well, it's corn gluten. It's okay. So we don't care. Gluten is gluten. So they may be telling you their product contains gluten because it has corn gluten in it. So try to get as much information so you can make your own choices. Or, I always tell people, on the Gluten-Free Drugs website, email me. If you have a difficult time, email me. Now, if you're on the West Coast, it may be a delay because I'm on the East Coast, but, feel free to email me, and I'll try to answer your question if somebody else can't answer it, or I'll try to clarify somebody's answer, because sometimes they can give you a very confusing answer. So we like to straighten it out. I like to keep all my celiac patients as healthy as we can, and I probably answer about 30 or 40 questions a day. So, feel free to give me a little text or something like that, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So I got a couple minutes left, and I got some time for questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you do have some questions and I can't get to them today, email me through the Gluten-Free Drugs website. Like I said, it comes right to my cell phone. So I can, take care of you in a relatively short manner if I've got the answer at my fingertips.
Steve, you are so helpful and so generous. Can I just say that everything you're doing is just fantastic.
I love it.
Do you see, I got one question that may have just been sent to me that says, are there any special considerations for dental products? I don't know if you would have any
Yes,
awareness of this.
actually, I have. I don't remember which ingredient, but one of my dental friends have told me that there might be one or two specialty items in the dental world that have gluten in it. But a lot of times the molds they put in your mouth, to do a repair a tooth or whatever, those are all gluten free. Toothpaste, the Colgate and Crest, and those are gluten free. But most of the dental products are gluten free.
Okay, that's perfect. And I think maybe that means that we're going to have a dental expert on a webinar in the future to tell us more about that.
Yes, they're amazing. The more and more dentists are paying attention to it because of the damage to the teeth that can occur on to a developing child, a child whose teeth are developing, who's a celiac patient who's been exposed to wheat. They can have some very unpleasant looking teeth, and the dentists are now screening for celiac disease by looking at the patient's teeth.
Yeah, that's a really amazing, that's a lot of, I've done that education personally to dental hygienists and to dentists about how to detect the signs of celiac disease, which really are signs of malnutrition generally in the dental enamel. So we'll definitely hope to have some resources for you all more on dental products. Steve, are there any, it sounds like, if I can summarize, that 11 medications out of 8,000 is somewhat surprising to me that that's the only amount that you found that contained wheat. Was that surprising to you?
Yes, it was. Actually, it was more than I thought it would be. But to just make it a little bit more clear, the 11 hits that I got, 3 of them, the medications were multiple strengths. So it might have 11 hits, but it's the one particular product that I displayed there has 3 different strengths. So that's 3 of the 11. And it's very interesting. That was a combination product. The drug company makes the active drug in an individual pill. It's gluten-free. They use a totally different starch. And I do want to mention one thing. I have a second left. Is this is for U.S. medications. Don't, if it's made in Canada or made in Mexico or something like that, all bets are off. As a matter of fact, there's a drug company called Teva, T-E-V-A, who makes an antibiotic it's a Keflex or cephalexin. In the United States, it's gluten-free, and I found out in the Canadian version it has wheat in it. And that was very interesting. Usually it's the other way around. The Canadians are on top of things and the US is a little behind. And they confirmed it I called them and they twice had to confirm it to me. They had wheat and we didn't. So be careful, where the medications come from. Sometimes, we can buy things overseas or from another country that's a lot less expensive, but you really don't know what's in it. And
the NIH website, Pillbox, and the other one that I'm forgetting the name of, those are just for U.S. drugs.
So that is correct.
If someone was concerned about a foreign drug, they would need to go to that manufacturer directly.
That is correct. And hopefully you can get the information. And just to let you know, I guess, again, I don't want to keep taking your time up, but you might find some products that are, made in India and made in China and stuff like that. I want you to know that the FDA has an inspector on site. So it's not like, they can put something together and then ship it to the U.S. and then, not disclose something. You do have an FDA inspector, and it is actually no different than if the manufacturing plant was in the U.S. They're under the same standards. They have to do the same purchasing, same disclosures. They have to cross all their T's. They have to dot all their I's. And if anything doesn't meet the standards of the FDA, they cannot send that to the United States. So they are very, very safe outside of fraud, of course, and we can't get rid of fraud, I'm afraid. But, if you trust the manufacturer in the U.S., then you're okay.
Okay, perfect. That's really good to know. So if anyone has additional questions for Steve, they can contact him through his website, glutenfreedrugs.com. And we will be posting the webinar slides on our website. They should be available tomorrow at celiac.org/webinars. And there's an entire article already online that Steve has provided us with that summarizes the most important of this information. So Steve, we are so grateful And it's just been a pleasure to meet and speak with you. And thank you so much.
I'm happy to do it. Like I said, I love my celiac group. I just get all excited.
We love you back.
Thank you. All
All
right.
right. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Gina.
And I did get another question. What about cold medicines? And I'll just say that Steve had said earlier that especially, liquid cold medicines, like, something you would take, the liquid usually may have a sugar alcohol in it, which would be gluten-free because it's processed to the point that it would not contain any gluten. But like Steve said, you could go to pillbox.com or the other website, which will be listed later, and you could investigate that medication yourself. So what I'm going to move on to is speaking about heart health. Because this is February, which is Heart Disease Awareness Month, I wanted to provide some information for you all about the different heart disorders that are common in celiac disease, as well as how we can best take care of our heart, mostly using diet. So this information was a little bit surprising to me. Here are some heart conditions that are related to celiac disease, which can be, common kind of coexisting conditions in people who are undiagnosed, and they can persist after diagnosis. So heart arrhythmias, where there's an irregular rhythm, are common. Ischemic heart disease, which can lead to a heart attack, is somewhat common. And then idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy, about 5.7% of those with celiac disease have this condition. And then what I want to discuss is kind of a new article that came out that we've published on our website about the risk of coronary artery disease in those with celiac disease. This study surveyed about 24,000 people with celiac disease and 22.35 million people without celiac disease, and compared their the rates of incidence of coronary artery disease, which is one of the major heart diseases that affects people. And this study actually found that those with celiac disease have almost twice higher risk of developing coronary artery disease in their lifetime. And the risk applied to people, not only those over age 65 who in general have a higher risk of heart disease, but it also applied to those under age 65. If you can see in this chart, the prevalence of coronary artery disease in those with celiac disease was 28.6% over age 65 and 4.5 in the age group 18 to 65. They also found that the risk of stroke was 1.4 times higher in those with celiac disease. So I don't know if this is information that you all have had, but this was somewhat surprising to me, and I think it's a really important thing for us all to know. The article itself just was an epidemiological study. It looked at just the overall incidence, so it didn't explore the exact causes or the exact relationship. But one of the co-researchers, Dr. Rama Dilip Gajulapalli, forgive me for mispronouncing, made this statement. He said that people with celiac disease are likely to have some persistent low-grade inflammation in the gut that can spill immune mediators into the bloodstream, which can then in turn accelerate the process of atherosclerosis and in turn coronary artery disease. And this theory is similar to the fact that we can see that other inflammatory states like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and inflammatory bowel diseases also have a higher incidence of coronary artery disease. So essentially, any sort of chronic inflammation in the body puts one's cardiovascular system at risk. And this is the thought process of how this happens. Our inflammatory cells, which need to be distributed to different parts of the body where the immune system is kind of flaring up, such as in the gut with celiac disease or in other parts of the body, in other autoimmune diseases, these cells that are circulating can damage the walls of the blood vessels and arteries. So when this damage is healed by the body, a plaque or like a hardened surface forms, almost as if, you know, when you get a cut on your skin, then a scab forms. And the scab is hardened until the tissue underneath can heal. But this plaque that may happen in arteries and blood vessels has a higher potential to rupture and then form a blood clot, which would then block the flow of blood through our arteries and vessels. And that would be a case that could cause a heart attack or a stroke. Whenever blood flow is prevented from reaching a part of the body, that part of the body is at risk because it can't receive oxygen primarily, as well as the other nutrients that the blood carries. So basically, any type of systemic inflammation that's circulated through the blood cells can put us at risk. And we know that those with celiac disease may have long-term chronic inflammation, whether it's their pre-diagnosis and they're not yet on the gluten-free diet, or if it's post-diagnosis, there may continue to be inflammation. So one of the most important things you can do to protect your heart is to follow the gluten-free diet carefully if you do have celiac disease. Even a minimal gluten intake could perpetuate, low-level chronic inflammation throughout the body. So really being careful about cross-contact and cheating on or intentionally eating small amounts of gluten could raise your inflammation in your body. Just in doing a literature or research review, I did find this study that I've listed here, which includes Dr. Green, who's on the CDF Medical Advisory Board, that the degree of villus atrophy, or the degree to which the intestines are damaged, did not seem to be related to the risk of heart disease. So that's just another piece of information that we do have to figure out more about how heart disease is related to celiac disease, but that was somewhat concerning. So now I'm going to talk about some dietary ways that we can protect our heart health. One of the biggest ways I would say is to balance omega-3 fatty acids with omega-6 fatty acids. You've probably heard a ton about omega-3s or omega-6s and may not know exactly what they are. So essentially these are fatty acids, fats, lipids, that are found in both plant and animal sources. And the omega shows us that it's unsaturated to some extent. So we know that saturated fats are hard and solid at room temperature, whereas unsaturated fats are fluid at room temperature, like your oils. So polyunsaturated fatty acids are really an essential nutrient that we have to take in from our diet in order to make building blocks for many different functions and cells in the body. In fact, every single cell in our body has a layer of fatty acids that make up the cell wall. So fatty acids and fats are really essential to our health. Now, omega-6 fatty acids, which is just one specific type of fatty acid, are pretty common in the U.S. diet, and they're very common in foods. You'll find them in vegetable oil, pretty much all oils, butter, and lard. But in the U.S. specifically, we tend to get a high amount of omega-6s. So here's a nice summary of the composition of different sources of fat. So on the left, you'll see canola oil, safflower oil, flaxseed oil, etc. Then you can see in the different colors how much of what type of fat is in that fat, what type of fatty acid is in that specific fat. So what we're looking at maximizing is the orange color, the omega-3 fatty acid named alpha-linolenic acid. So everyone right now, go ahead and look at what type of oil you use in your kitchen and make a mental note of how high that oil is in omega-3 fatty acid. If you're like, well, I personally use a lot of canola oil because I'm aware of this information, but if you're like most Americans, you're probably using pure vegetable oil, which is usually corn or soybean oil, or you're using olive oil because we've all heard about such great health benefits of olive oil. But all of these are actually not good sources of omega-3 fatty acids. You can see that all of these are pretty high in the omega-6 fatty acids and omega-9 fatty acids. So I'm going to explain to you why we might want to increase the amount of omega-3s in our diet. Just to point out here also that flaxseed oil has the highest proportion of omega-3 fatty acids, and canola oil and soybean oil are also good sources. So a little science behind why we want to have more omega-3s. Omega-6s are part of our inflammatory response. Anytime we have an invader or an attack on our body, such as a bacteria, a toxin, any type of stress, we're going to have an inflammatory response that helps attack that. And we need an inflammatory response. We need our immune system to act on invaders, otherwise we would constantly be under infection. However, in modern day life, there are a lot of kind of chronic stressors, and some people have too much inflammatory response in their body, especially those with autoimmune disorders, inflammatory bowel disease, heart disease, other inflammatory conditions. So research is finding that eating a higher proportion of omega-3 fatty acids can actually slow down the inflammatory response. It doesn't prevent it altogether, but it slows it down, so we can decrease the amount of inflammation in our body through eating more omega-3s. Kind of restating, the best sources of omega-3 fatty acids are primarily fish and fish oil, and then we have plant sources like flaxseed, walnuts, soybeans, and canola. Other benefits of omega-3 fatty acids. Several research studies have found that they lower, having a high intake can lower blood triglycerides, which is one of the circulating fats in our body that you'll have checked by your doctor when you do a cholesterol panel. And high levels of triglycerides are another risk factor for heart disease because they can be damaging to the walls of our blood vessels as well. There's some research that suggests that omega-3 fatty acids can improve brain health. They're definitely necessary for growing infants and children. That's why they're added to infant formula. If you've heard of DHA, that's a really important omega-3 fatty acid for growing infants and children. It's also important for the aging to prevent and slow down dementia and Alzheimer's disease. They may be good for mental health and help alleviate depression. And they may also decrease inflammation systemically in autoimmune diseases. There's some research that they may be helpful in rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. So theoretically, they could be helpful for celiac disease as well, not as the primary treatment, not a substitution for the gluten-free diet, but in addition. So fish oil is utilized better than vegetable oils. Fish contain like a more active form of the omega-3s that our body can use really readily, called DHA and EPA. And then the plant sources like flaxseed, walnuts, canola oil, soybean oil, those contain ALA, which has to be converted to a different form in order for our body to use it. So actually, just getting the pure DHA from fish and fish oil is the most recommended, and then also getting these plant oils that have ALA can be beneficial. The recommended dose is 1,000 milligrams per day of DHA and EPA through fish oil. So if you're considering taking a fish oil supplement, go ahead and choose one that's 1,000 milligrams per day, or talk to your physician about what's appropriate for you, especially for those who may have clotting disorders and maybe on a blood thinner. So one way that I've talked about before, actually in the last webinar, to just help us to improve the amount of omega-3s in our diet is to institute meatless Mondays and fatty fish Fridays. So just by eliminating animal sources of protein on one day a week and making sure you get fish another day a week, you can help decrease the omega-6 fatty acids and saturated fatty acids, and you can increase your omega-3s. This will also just naturally decrease your amount of dietary cholesterol and saturated fat. And then also by eating more plants and plant sources of protein, those come along with something called phytosterols, which kind of look like cholesterol but don't act like cholesterol. And so they can block absorption of dietary cholesterol in our gut. So just by eating more plants and fish, we can help out our heart. So here's a list of fatty fishes that are good to include in your diet. Salmon, of course, we've all heard about, and wild salmon is found to be higher in omega-3 fatty acids, as well as among other things. So go ahead and choose wild whenever you can. Anchovies, bluefish, herring, mackerel, sardines, sturgeon, lake trout, and tuna are also good sources. I will say that mackerel is one that could have a higher level of heavy metals, so you want to be sure to limit that one, especially for pregnant women or children. So more on getting more plants in your diet is really heart protective for several reasons, partially because of the phytosterols, partially just getting omega-3 fatty acids if you're eating plants like nuts and leafy greens, but also for the antioxidants. So getting the recommended dose, your medicine is 7 servings per day of fruits and vegetables. So fruits and vegetables are alive, they're rich, we're putting just great nutrients into our body when we eat them. And they're full of antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, and even more numerous compounds that we haven't even identified yet that help to roam our body and neutralize any free radicals that are produced in some of our stress responses. And just in normal digestion in everyday life, we produce free radicals, and the antioxidants kind of capture them and make them less reactive so that they don't roam our body and kind of wreak damage. Another protective thing you can do for yourself is to limit sodium and simple sugars in your diet. I'll start with sugar. A high amount of simple sugar intake is well demonstrated to increase triglycerides in our bloodstream and disrupt the balance between LDL and HDL cholesterol. So like I said, triglycerides are a type of a carrier of fats throughout our body, as are LDL and HDL. And all of these are measured in your cholesterol panel by your doctor. So too much triglycerides in the bloodstream are known to be damaging or negative for heart health, as well as too much LDL and not enough HDL cholesterol. So just by limiting your simple sugars, you can really change the composition of the cholesterol circulating in your blood. Furthermore, we definitely know that excess salt can contribute to high blood pressure, especially in certain people are very sensitive to salt. So if someone already has high blood pressure, absolutely limiting salt can be part of the treatment, and for those who may be at risk of high blood pressure as well. These are just overall things to help your cardiovascular system, and ways to limit sugar and sodium, really to choose whole foods over packaged foods, and to cook at home more than eating out, so that you know what's in your food, how much salt is added, how much simple sugar is added as well. And then finally, physical activity is very protective for the cardiovascular system. I think that most people struggle with not getting any activity in this, day-to-day world where we're sitting in front of computers and driving in the car all day. So if you identify with that, a great way just to incorporate some physical activity, to take a 20-minute walk on your lunch break, or to stand up every day at work, set an alarm or a timer, and make sure that you get some movement every single day. Make sure you're not sitting in front of the computer screen for 8 hours straight. If you're already active and do a lot of sports or exercise, just be sure to balance your type of activity so that you're not stressing only one way of your exercise. So I always recommend incorporating yoga and stretching, especially to help calm our stress response that we might be feeling. These are all protective things for our heart. That's everything I have to say about heart health. We will have a special webinar next month in March, and we will be sending out the announcement for that. Just a reminder that you will be able to access this presentation and the recording at celiac.org/webinars. And you can access all of my articles for Ask the Dietitian. You can also submit your own personal question at celiac.org/ask. So I'll be hanging around for a couple minutes if anyone has questions, and thank you so much. Have a great day.